I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on H.J. Res. 70, and that I may include tabular material on the same.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Well, here we are again, Mr. Speaker. We were here yesterday with Republicans trying to open the government back up and the Democrats opposing opening the government back up. But, Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of this important legislation to fund the operations of the National Park Service, the Smithsonian Institution, the U.S. Holocaust Museum, and the National Gallery of Art. Mr. Speaker, I spoke yesterday about some of the effects of the government shutdown, which began a couple of days ago. With each passing day, we hear of more and more impacts resulting from the shutdown across the country and in our nation's capital. I want to remind my friends on the other side of the aisle that all 401 National Park Service units in the United States, 19 Smithsonian museums and galleries, including the National Zoo, the Holocaust Museum, and the National Gallery of Art, remain closed to the public. This legislation, if adopted, would reopen these national treasures to the American public. Mr. Speaker, the government shutdown is having a real impact on real people and on the national economy. I remind my colleagues that it is estimated that the local economy is losing up to $200 million a day with the National Zoo, Smithsonian Museums, Holocaust Museum, and the National Gallery of Art and other popular attractions closed to the public. This doesn't even begin to measure the national and international impacts of these closures. Think of the families, the veterans groups, the groups of students who all have saved for months and in some cases years to travel to our nation's capital from across the country to visit the Air and Space Museum, the Lincoln Memorial, the World War II Memorial, the National Zoo, Ford's Theater, or the National Gallery of Art. This government shutdown has a real impact on real people. Think of the families who made reservations to visit Yosemite or Yellowstone or the Statue of Liberty and now find these national parks shuttered today. This government shutdown, again, has real impacts on real people. Think of the impact the government shutdown is having on Ford's Theater, one of the most hallowed National Park Service historic sites in our country. Not only are tourists denied entrance to the historic theater, but the shutdown has forced evening performances of the theater to be moved to another location because of the budget impasse. Think of the young people who have a National Park Service permit to get married at the Jefferson Memorial this Saturday. Their families are arriving from all over the country, over 130 people, for what should be the happiest day of this new couple's life. But because the government shut down, they are not able to get married at the Jefferson Memorial and are now scrambling to find an alternative location to get married. Let's pass this bill so this couple and millions of Americans across this country can enjoy our national parks, and this couple can get married at the Jefferson Memorial. There's a photo on the front page of today's Washington Post showing National Park Service employees putting up barricades around the Martin Luther King Memorial on the National Mall. Remember, this is an open air, accessible to the public 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and we are putting barriers around it. Just down the street, barricades were put up around the World War II Memorial. Again, a memorial accessible to the public 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Fortunately, these temporary barriers didn't stop a large group of visiting World War II veterans, members of the greatest generation in their 80s and 90s, many of them in wheelchairs, from storming the barricades so that they could witness the memorial built in their honor of courage and sacrifice. Tourists visiting Washington, and indeed many furloughed federal employees, are today finding actual physical barriers to prevent them from experiencing our open-air national monuments honoring Lincoln, Jefferson, King, and our World War II heroes. At some point, Congress and the President will overcome their differences over federal funding. But isn't it ironic and even cynical that when the government shuts down, the President's administration actually builds physical barriers at sites that are otherwise open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year? How cynical is that? Now, some people say they put those barriers there to protect them from vandalism. So we use the park police to put up and protect the barriers, but not the monuments. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. To my friends on the Democratic side of the aisle and to the President, I say this. If you seek a solution to this government shutdown, if you seek a bipartisan solution, Mr. President, you can start by tearing down these barriers. Let's open our national parks. Let's open the Smithsonian, the National Zoo, the Holocaust Museum, and the National Gallery of Art. Why are the House and Senate Democrats denying the American people the right to visit these treasured sites? To my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I will close with this thought. By opposing this legislation, you are voting to keep our national parks closed, to keep Yellowstone closed, to keep Yosemite closed, to keep the Statue of Liberty closed, to keep Ford's Theater closed. You are voting to keep the Smithsonian closed. You are voting to keep the National Zoo closed. You are voting to keep the Holocaust Museum closed. You are voting to keep the National Gallery of Art closed. We should not be using our national parks, the Smithsonian, the National Zoo, the Holocaust Museum, and the National Gallery of Art as hostages for the Democratic my way or the highway shutdown. And that's exactly what this is. This is the Democratic, you either agree with us or we will shut the government down. We just simply wanted to go to conference, but no, that's not good enough either. We can't go to conference and talk about these differences, so let's shut it down, and that's exactly what the Democratic Party has done. Mr. Speaker, this is a common sense bill, and I encourage my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support it. Let's reopen these national treasures, and I reserve the balance of my time.